question I've got for you is, 1999, you redesignated the surplus ID numbers for the CTS site and the Mills Gap Road site. Okay, how can you justify leaving the Rice family on that property if you've deemed it a hazardous waste site, or is it a Superfund site? How can you leave a family sitting on a site that you have already declared is a hazardous waste site? Why should that family not be relocated?
Well, a couple things. I was personally involved in the screw up to have two sites, and I can tell you how it happened. I'm sitting in Atlanta. I don't remember the date. Somebody read me something today. I think it was in August of 1999, and I was on call for emergency response. The phone rang, and it was somebody from Jim's office, and they had data from drinking water, a spring and a well up here that was hot. And when we get that, the first thing we do is get the people on bottled water until we can figure out a more permanent solution, which in this case was to hook them up to city water. Well, I'm sitting there in Atlanta. I don't know. All I know is the address of where we need to take the bottled water. I don't know that CTS is next door. I didn't have the benefit of that. So I wrote on the procurement request for the bottled water, Mills Gap Road site. That's what I called it. And that got its own number and everything else. And so, you know, that's a mistake, and that's how it happened. And so, in the spirit of going forward, we're going to call it the CTS site. When it goes on the national priorities list, it's going to go on as the CTS site, not the Mills Gap Road site.
Unfortunately for Region 4, this is not how things work in the real world. Here's what really happened. On August 16th, 1999, NC Diener contacted the Chief of Emergency Response and Removal for EPA Region 4, Mr. Doug Lair. They contacted Mr. Lair for an emergency response and removal investigation based on an event that took place on July 8, 1999. Max Hainer and Chu Chi of the Division of Water Quality sampled the Rice's property on July 9th and July 12th, finding pervasive and intense concentrations of TCE and petroleum products on their property. This led NC Diener to sample 9 wells within half a mile of the CTS plant. The Rice drinking springs were at 21,000 parts per billion, which is 7,000 times the state MCL. Of the 9 wells tested, the Robinsons came in hot, 270 parts per billion pre-filter, 170 parts per billion post-filter. They were 1,200 feet down gradient of the CTS site. This is what prompted NC Diener to call for an emergency investigation for a removal event to get these families off of their water source and onto city water. The second paragraph connected CTS of Asheville and the contamination event from July 8, 1999. It reads, the contaminated well and spring are both located approximately 1,500 feet southeast and downgradient of the CTS of Asheville site. NCD 003149556. The CTS site was listed in surplus and assigned a NIFRAP disposition in 1991 based on the site investigation conducted by the EPA FIT contractor. At the time, the nearest well was believed to be 4,000 feet northwest of CTS and was not found to be contaminated. CTS of Asheville manufactured electronic parts and conducted electroplating operations on site from around 1964 until 1986. TCE was used at the site and stored in an above-ground storage tank on site, which has reportedly been removed. High levels of TCE, 53,000 parts per billion, were identified in subsurface soils near a waste sump outside the plating room at CTS in an earlier study. The current owner of the CTS property is redacted. The property is currently leased as a warehouse space. So in the second paragraph alone, CTS is referenced 7 times, including NC Diener giving EPA Region 4 its own CERCLA designation, CTS of Asheville site, NCD 003149556. NC Diener says that the CTS site was listed in the surplus in 1991 and that a NIFRAP disposition had also been given in 1991 based on an earlier investigation, ironically, that had EPA trespassing on the Rice property at sample CASDO2 June 26, 9:30 in the morning. The reference to the nearest well being 4,000 feet away comes from that 1990 investigation from the field inspection team screening site inspection. And the closest well believed was 4,226 feet away when the Robinson well was 3,000 feet closer. NC Diener is letting EPA know that the site that's in their surplus inventory was producing TCE from about 1964, when in reality it was 1959 to 1987. NC Diener was also alerting EPA that in an earlier study conducted by Law Environmental as a private audit in a pre-sale agreement with CTS and Marvin Goebels, that TCE was discovered at 53,000 parts per billion in subsurface soils. Now you can see why Don Rigger wanted to say it was a phone call that triggered all this business when it wasn't. Page 2 serves as documentation for what really happened. Early July 1999, the North Carolina Division of Water Quality Groundwater Section was contacted regarding an oily leachite in the ditch on the Rice property at 275 Mills Gap Road. On July 9th, the ditch liquid was sampled, and on July 12th, 2 springs on the neighboring properties were sampled. Page 2 goes on to say that 2 springs were sampled, one at 15,000 parts per billion, and the active spring for drinking water source for Terry and Larry Jr. was at 21,000 parts per billion TCE. Page 2, second paragraph, details July 28, 1999, in the groundwater section of NC Diener, identifying 9 wells within half a mile. One of the wells, the Robinson well, came back hot. 2 samples, one before the filter was at 270, and the post-filter sample was at 170 parts per billion of TCE. The Robinson well serves 2 homes, providing water to 3 adults and 2 small grandchildren ages 20 months to 3 years. Ethel Robinson lived in the front home. It was never hooked up to city water. She died of pancreatic and liver cancer. Now her 35-year-old granddaughter has been given the preliminary diagnosis for thyroid cancer. And then comes page 3, the best page. At the bottom it shows who received the attachments: Jennifer Wendell, USEPA, and Don Rigger, USEPA. Remember, it was Rigger who said he received a phone call, yet here he is receiving the attachments that were removed from the library by David Dorian in the summer of 2007. Those attachments were part of the administrative record, and they were removed, and for good reason if you're EPA. Rigger saying he's in Atlanta getting a phone call, and he doesn't know CTS is next door to the Rices. Here's the Rice family property. Down the street, 1,200 feet from the plant, the Robinsons. 2 houses served by that well, and Ethel Robinson dying of pancreatic cancer and liver cancer. And now Shannon with a preliminary diagnosis for thyroid cancer, and he doesn't know that CTS is next to the Rices, or does he? And on the Rice property, the sickness is just as extreme. Larry Rice with an operable brain tumor, and Devin Rice with 2 optical nerve tumors, and Dot Rice with a thyroid tumor. Now let's set the record straight. In 2007, David Dorian removed the administrative record from the PAC library. The materials that are missing serve as an indictment against EPA Region 4 and others. Part of the documents removed is the 43-page attachment that Lair, Wendell, and Rigger received. Yeah, that notebook served as critical information. Just as questions were being asked publicly about the handling in 2007, it went missing because David Dorian took it. He had put it in the library in May 07. It was gone by the middle of the summer. Just as questions were coming around from the Mountain Express and Rebecca Bowe about the handling of the CTS site and the disaster it had become. Yep, this 1999 August 16th letter requesting EPA come in and do an emergency response and removal investigation to try to help the Rices and the Robinsons get on city water, it was pretty condemning right there. There were so many connections already made to the CTS property, the CTS of Asheville site, and that Don Rigger and Jennifer Wendell and Doug Lair had all received it. Yeah, these 3 pages link CTS of Asheville to that contamination event. But then again, so did the attachments that followed that were removed from the library. First page of the attachments was a map used in 1990 by EPA for their Phase 2 FIT SSI. Page 2 of the attachments is the final report for the CERCLA investigation for NCD 0031495556. That is the CTS of Asheville site. That is page 2. Page 3, a fax from Kay DeCant to Pat DeRosa regarding the sampling investigation for the July 8, 1999 event. Page 4 is a hand-drawn map from Chu Chi and Max Hainer, Division of Water Quality, from the July 9th sampling. Now, Don Rigger received these attachments. How could he not know that CTS was next door? Here is the second and third map provided in the attachments to Rigger. It shows Terry's house, Larry Sr.'s, Larry Jr.'s. It shows the stream. It shows the relationship to CTS, including an elevation profile. The fourth map appears on page 5 of the attachments that Rigger got. It clearly shows the CTS site in relation to the Rice Springs and the Robinson well, listed as number 1 of the 9 wells tested within half a mile. Unfortunately, in 1990, EPA Region 4 opted to go 4,226 feet away to 1 Forest Run Drive, and that well sample turned up clean in 1990. They could have come up 3,000 feet closer and sampled the Robinson's well. Remember Rigger's water procurement form explanation? How about the first chain of custody? Chu Chi's work on July 9, 1999, sampling the ditches on the Rice property. Check out the location or site. It says CTS, Mills Gap Road, Asheville. Is there any question that the two are linked? Is there any doubt that the two are linked? Here it is, CTS, Mills Gap Road, Asheville, the ditches. Linked, first chain of custody. Every single page linked CTS to the site. On page 22 of the attachments, here's a fax from Chu Chi to Charlotte Jesnick, Inactive Hazardous Sites Chief. Hi Charlotte, here's a copy of lab results for water supply wells near for the CTS facility. Among 9 wells we sampled, only 1 well is hot. It is located about 1,200 feet downgrading of the CTS. There is a filter system for this well, but it does not help too much. Both before filter and after filter samples are hot. There are 2 small children live in the house. Kay is going to talk to Dr. Rudo, state toxicologist, this morning first, and then give bad news to the property owners. Questions, call Kay. Chu-Chi 8999, 9:20 in the morning. There is no question that CTS of Asheville was linked to the contamination from July 1999. The only question is, doesn't it seem obvious why the administrative record was removed in 2007? And there are Rigger's words, his own words, explaining how he created a second CERCLA site, put it on the Rices. He served as the project manager in 99. Rigger signed the 2002 Emergency Action Memorandum for enforcement. Rigger wrote the draft version of the 2004 Administrative Order on Consent. Rigger controls the site today as Remedial Branch Chief. Remember Rigger's words.
A couple things. I was personally involved in the screw up to have 2 sites, and I can tell you how it happened. I'm sitting in Atlanta. I don't remember the date. Somebody read me something today. I think it was in August of 1999. And I was on call for emergency response. The phone rang, and it was somebody from Jim's office, and they had data from drinking water, a spring and a well up here that was hot. And when we get that, the first thing we do is get the people on bottled water until we can figure out a more permanent solution, which in this case was to hook them up with city water. Well, I'm sitting there in Atlanta. I don't know. All I know is the address of where we need to take the bottled water. I don't know that CTS is next door. I didn't have the benefit of that. So I wrote on the procurement request for the bottled water, Mills Gap Road site. That's what I called it. And that got its own number and everything else. And so, that's a mistake, and that's how it happened. And so, in the spirit of going forward, we're going to call it the CTS site. When it goes on the national priorities list, it's going to go on as the CTS site, not the Mills Gap Road site.
Mr. Rigger, why not mention the official request from NC Diener in August of 1999 for the emergency removal investigation? How does that 43-page attachment support your claims? And how exactly do CERCLA sites get created anyway? 1 is Resource Conservation Recovery Act permitting. 2, to have a hazardous event, spill, or release that requires a CERCLA-funded response. Isn't that right, Region 4? And you're going to go with that explanation, Mr. Rigger. And now Region 4 is on the hook using your explanation as the official response to how Mills Gap Road groundwater contamination site got created. Wasn't a screw-up, was it? It was done on purpose, wasn't it? Now the truth. Please view EPA-Fake-CERCLA Part 2.